Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start in 1 minute. We're just letting in a bunch of people.
They're pounding on the gate.
We knew this would be popular, but we had no idea. So Grace says, so happy about this event. Just going to give it 1 more minute so we can let some people in, and then we'll start promptly. Thank you so much for everyone who's come. Dick Bowden from Big Indian.
And Wolf is here. Van Flack.
Okay, I'm gonna start. Welcome everyone to Evan Pritchard's lecture on Phoenicia's ancient past. How the Esopus Munsee people got through winter before electricity, and so much more. My name is Liz Potter. I'm the director of Phoenicia Library, and we are your host. Mr. Pritchard has written 4 books I discovered on Native Americans. A book called Native New Yorkers, and another one called No Word for Time on the Algonquins, Bird Medicine, The Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism, and Henry Hudson and the Algonquins. And these books we have just purchased, and they will be in the library system, but they're also available for purchase through booksellers. Mr. Pritchard is a descendant of Mi'kmaq peoples and has taught Native American studies at Pace, Vassar, and Marist. He is the director of the Center for Algonquin Culture. We are so lucky to have him. Apparently, he is a frequent guest on NPR. I have some very brief Zoom housekeeping. As you probably noticed, we are recording. So be aware of that. Your name and your image may appear. Also, because many people couldn't make this, we hope to have this up on YouTube. Sometimes YouTube can be finicky, but that is our goal, and that should be on by Monday. We have muted all the participants because right now we've got 50 people here. And please ask your questions in chat at the end. We're going to start question and answer around 8 o'clock. Please enjoy, and if you have to leave, it's fine. We will not consider it rude, just you don't have to put anything in chat. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Mr. Pritchard.
Well, thank you, Liz. So sound check, you can hear me fine, right? Everybody, right? Okay, so yeah, I realized that that Chandakin includes how many Hamlets, like more Hamlets, than Shakespeare ever wrote. So it's a lot, and Phoenicia is one of them. And I realized that I used to have an office in Pine Hill. The Center for Algonquin Culture did have an office for many years in Pine Hill, and that actually turned out to be part of Chandakin. So I'm kind of coming home in some ways, and Phoenicia is the jewel, the jewel of the Chandakin area. So it's an honor to be here, and it's caused me to do a lot of new research to put pieces together here, and so I hope this is all somewhat useful to people of Phoenicia, and I'm really excited about that. And I thought I'd wear my ribbon shirt to feel celebratory and get into my native vibe, which I love. So this is what's comes out of it, is like a whole new kind of area, and some of it's controversial in terms of historical or otherwise. And so there's 2 parts, really. The first part's about the lay of the land and the land of Phoenicia, but the surrounding area. And then the second part is what the heck did people do in the winter when they didn't have electricity? It's not, you don't think about it, but it's a very basic question that everyone should answer. It's like, how come we're so dependent on electricity that we can't get through a winter? And I'm not saying I can, but that's an important existential question, right? Like, who are we as human beings, how we got here? Well, we got here by being able to live in winter without electricity. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So that's why the whole second part is about that. And I think it's fascinating. I think you'll love it. And I'm not sure which half was more fun, the history or the seasonal bit. So I'm going to try sharing screen here and show you a slideshow. And there we go. Okay, so let's see from the beginning. Okay, so you might recognize this street. That's Phoenicia. So I'm first going to talk about, I love linguistics, come from a long line of linguists. I want to talk about the names Phoenicia and Chandakin, because it's really a deep subject that could go on for hours, but I'll try to be concise. Of course, Phoenicia being the largest hamlet in Chandakin, as I understand, with a whopping population of 309. Now, the original name of the town was Phoenix, and it was named, so I'm told, after the Simpson tannery, which was called the Phoenix, and that's from Alonzo and Ruth Gale's book, which I understand is very popular, and I'm sure it's in the library. That was where the mail was dropped off. So this is early times, 1851, the mail was dropped off at the tannery, of course. And then Phoenix, by the way, is very important to understand this transformation. The Phoenixes are great at transformation, but he was really a Greek god before anything else. He's in that whole lineage of Zeus and everybody else. And so don't think it quite yet as a bird, think of it as a male god. Around 1851, which was the time of this post office, it was changed to Phoenicia. It's a better name for a post office, but why? Well, according to the numerous sources that I've read, the land of Phoenicia, and that's in the Middle East, was founded by Phoenix, the god, just as the land of Phoenicia, New York, was founded by the Phoenix Tannery. How you like that? So that's a stretch, but it makes sense. But yeah, the story is that the god Phoenix went looking for his stolen sister, went all over the world and never found her, but when in the process discovered what is now thought of as Phoenicia, part of, I guess, the whole Canaan area, and changed names sometimes. Okay, so this is the first bit that might be controversial, is that it was about that same general time, as I recall, there was supposedly found a Phoenicia stone discovered near here, meaning Phoenicia, with Phoenician letters carved in it. Lab tests were done in the 1980s, maybe 89, 90, and the incisions were not new, according to the scientists, at least 100 years old, so they claimed. And in photos provided to me, which I did remember clearly seeing them, and I remember what they looked like, the characters were distinctly of the Phoenician family of letters. Now, who would concoct such an elaborate hoax, and for what reason? Or was it actually authentic? Well, they knew it was at least 100 years old, but they couldn't tell if it was much older. But the thing is that, it's an unsolved mystery. Mysteries unexplained. But also that means it could have been made around the time that they changed the name to Phoenicia, but I don't know that, I wasn't there. So on the right, you see an actual Phoenician stone that is now on display in Sardinia, in the whole Italian area there. And it was found in 1773. So somebody could have done a rubbing of it, and the rubbing could have gone from hand to hand to hand to hand around the world, and ended up in Phoenicia by the date of 1851. I don't know. This is just, I'm just throwing these things out so that you can do research and find out this mystery. But I did see the photos of the stone, and I just, I memorized them. Okay, so going on with the story. Some believe the story of the Phoenix rising from the ashes was really symbolic of the Phoenician army capable of rising again after defeat in the Punic Wars. I know they had a different name then, and it's on the tip of my tongue. I'm sure we all know that. Carthage. But its color is a reference to Phoenicia's distinctive dyes, which they're very famous for, the purple and the red. And there it is, purple and red bird feathers. They invented the phonetic alphabet. And that made the Phoenician library possible. So you were in the Phoenician library without the Phoenician letters, which we all know, you couldn't read a book in the library, so it wouldn't exist. So there's an existential question, okay? But again, it's not an Indian word. People say, oh, Phoenicia, isn't that Native American? No, no. But it's interesting. There is a Native American story of Thunderbird, however, and the Thunderbird is very much like the Phoenix. But we like to say that it's not derived from the Phoenix. It's a separate story. But in the Thunderbird story, which is very popular through the Great Lakes especially, is there was one version of the story. There was a young man who was very righteous and upstanding, and he always told the truth. And there were some bullies in town who were robbing and stealing everybody in the native village. And so he stood up to them and he told the truth about them. They said, I've seen them and I've heard people say that these people, these bullies are committing crimes and we should all get together and, maybe pass some votes in council and do something about it. Well, nobody did anything at all. They just said, oh, well, let boys be boys or whatever, and let bullies be bullies. And so they cornered him and then they tied him to a tree. And they set the tree on fire and all of it was ashes. So the boy in the tree became ashes. But then the next day, this wonderful Thunderbird rose from the ashes and flew around and saying, see, I'm back, And so that's one of the many Thunderbird stories. And there's the Thunderbird clan, and this Lakota had the Thunderbird, and I think Sitting Bull had a dream about a Thunderbird that changed his life. Put him on the path. So it's all these different things. It all ties in with Phoenicia, and Native Americans. Now, this is something I think you might find interesting. And I've looked at a lot of sites of Native American villages, especially Algonquin, and there's certain configurations. And I've written one of my books. And by the way, the 4 books that Liz was talking about were the 4 that have gotten international attention, but they're about New York, but there's a lot of other books, and published and some self-published. So very sensitive to landscapes that suggest places for native villages. They're found one, usually at the bend of a stream, 2, at a confluence of a stream with its tributary or tributaries. And the more tributaries, the more likely they're going to live there. And 3, where several trails come together, and 4, at major fording places. Well, the reasons for at least 4 are, I think, self-explanatory in a way, but you can imagine, the bend in the stream, I think, so you can kind of see what's coming down the road. And the confluence is, there's used for travel and fishing. So streams, the tributaries are means of travel. And so it's a hub. And where trails come together, the same thing, only in terms of walking, that travelers would come together in this travel hub and a major fording place. Okay, so there's 2 fording places that are very key in Phoenicia. If you go right to where 214 starts today, there's Stony Clove Creek, and that's right in the middle of the road, so you have to cross it. And also there's actually 2 fording places at the Esopus right around Phoenicia, the one that's called the Railroad Rapids. So that's extraordinary. Okay, so you'd think millions of Native Americans would have lived in Phoenicia. However, at this point, no one has provided me any real evidence of any major village. And so all these things. So it's located at that stream, the bend of the Esopus. It's joined by the Woodland Valley stream, the Pantherkill, and the Stony Clove. And then there was the Portage route 28 coming through, which is now 28, but it was a major portage route, which we're going to talk about. Stony Clove Trail, now 214, was also clearly used because that's where, at least in the story, Chief Chandakin walked. And the Muddy Brook Trail, now I think it's 47, and these 2 major fording places, but there's little or no evidence of a major village here. And I say, if anyone knows of the evidence, please let me know. But here's the map showing you what a lovely place to have a native village, and nothing, crickets. Okay, now this is, I think, key. The word Chandakin. I've been writing about this for 30 years, so it's time to really nail it down. Land of spruce and hemlock. Okay, the town of I know you heard something else. The town of Chandakin starts at its Chandakin starts at its border with Boyceville, stretches west to High Mount at the edge of Ulster County. That's a big area. It's all part of the Hudson River watershed. The word Chandakin is a Muncie, Delaware word, but does not mean rapid water. In David Zeisberger's essay of Delaware, Indian and English spelling book for the use of the schools of Christian Indians on Muskegon River, published by Henry Miller, publishers in Philadelphia in 1776. Remember Philadelphia in 1776, there were other things going on. And, but that's where the book was published. On page 55, it lists the word shindikeu. Okay, so that's what it says. It's a German writer, German spelling, but it's shindikeu, meaning where spruce is plenty. That's the definition that Zeisberger gave it. So the akin or ken suffix commonly indicates the state of being, often elided into the rest of the word. A lot of Algonquin words do end in akin or ken. So Chandakin is definitely in the Delaware language, but is it spruce or is it hemlock? Well, this is a spruce on the left, and this is a hemlock here in the middle. They look pretty similar, because this hemlock actually have this little kind of disease these days, didn't used to, but it's the tips that get infected with, infested, I mean, with bugs, and they have the white kind of gummy thing. Okay, so there is a spruce mountain and there's a hemlock mountain in Chandakin Township, kind of to the west of Slide Mountain. They're both for evergreen. So this word shind really could at very least mean evergreen. I'm gonna move this. So the term Chandakin also comes from Greene County via Chief Chandakin, if his story is true. We'll talk about that in a minute. But does the word mean spruce or hemlock? Well, whoever taught Zeisberger the Muncie language may have not known the difference or taught him this word, or was unable to convey the difference to Zeisbergers. And we see this a lot with species of birds and plants. You see the Muncie word sometimes covers more than one, like woodpecker can mean, there's a word, it's a long word, but it means the larger bird with the red head, who was a woodpecker. So it's definitely not the one that's the tiny little red-headed woodpecker, but it has a red head and it's bigger. So you got to figure it's pileated, and that's the way the words work. So there's not unusual. Zeisberger may have made a mistake and bunched them together, and he does have no word listed in this book for hemlock. It's also possible that the late Delaware people at the time used only one term for both, the way we use evergreen. Even though they used hemlock and not spruce for its tannin in the hide tanning process. Also, at first contact, the town probably had a mix of spruce and hemlock. As the tanneries increased, and you know, I was told the Simpsons had 13 tanneries at one time, the hemlock became famous. From a distance, the two look very similar in appearance, as you see. So it's an interesting problem to have. It's sometimes you wish for simpler, but it's more intriguing this way. Okay, who is David Zeisberger? He wrote the first Delaware Muncie dictionary, Muncie Unami, out in Ohio. This painting by Jonathan Haidt is called Zeisberger Preaching to the Indians. He wrote and published that first dictionary, sometimes called Lenape language. And on 55 is the word Shindikeu, a place of many spruces. But when I hear that word as a student, as an avid student of Muncie, I hear it is a land of many evergreens, Shind being evergreen and Key being land, and au, the suffix meaning it is. So that's my take on it. It is a place of evergreens. Now, this is an interesting aspect of the story. Pine Orchard, which still exists, if you go to North South Lake or North Lake South Lake Campground, there are signs indicating that Pine Orchard was there, and it's a beautiful place. That was, they say, the home of Chief Chandakin, and he came a long time before the town. According to the legend, Chandakin lived at Pine Orchard at the Table Rock. This painting is by Edwin Church, and many painters painted Table Rock. It's pretty spectacular. Now, I just want to say that I went there not that long ago during the whole issue with people were saying the Northern Lights were going to show, and that's a very special thing for us Micmac people. So I went driving around in the night looking for the ideal place to see the Northern Lights, and I was drawn to this place because it has the best view of the east, and that's where those things come up. So I didn't see it, by the way. There was no Northern Lights after all that trouble, but I did find this pine orchard, and the Catskill Mountain House is no longer there. It was torn down in about 1961, so you just missed it. This site is at the North-South Lake in eastern Palinville off 23A. The story is that his daughter Lotowana, which doesn't really mean anything in Muncie, but okay, was killed by this jealous suitor, Norseredden, who was not native. And after her burial, Chandakin, in his grief, left Palinville, which is also part of the Catskill area, and he went elsewhere. So where did he go? Well, it's presumed by just about everybody that he went to Chandakin, New York, hence giving his name to the place. But it's also a common word for spruce or hemlock. Pine Orchard is famed for spruce and hemlock, as well as white pine. It's likely that Chandakin named himself after the trees at Pine Orchard. If he did move to what we now call Chandakin, he didn't have to change his name, and he would have felt right at home because it's similar terrain and very old trees. It was a day's hike of 20, and maybe you say 24 miles at the most, depending on where you start, from Pine Orchard to Phoenicia. And almost all of that trek is along Route 214, which was apparently a commonly used trail. There's several mentions I came across of people walking along 214. Apparently he did. So that's the Stony Clove. Now we get to the real controversy, and can have our, little wrestling match over this. Here's the sign, Fort Chandakin. Looks so simple. 1779. It's an actual date, Fort Chandakin, an actual place. During the Revolutionary War, a log fort stood near this spot to defend Kingston from enemy attack. Well, there's a lot of holes in that sentence, but we'll talk about it. There was a Revolutionary fort, but it wasn't really built in 1779. It was along the Pipacton Trail, much of which in Chandakin is 28. After Joseph Brant's attacks on settlers at Peenpack, in what's now Huguenot, and Fantine Kill, and I believe those were the Palatines, Governor Clinton ordered it built on May 12, 1779. It was completed June 2nd. I mean, that's incredible. That's less than 3 weeks, hardly 3 weeks later. Built of logs and surrounded by an abet and designed to hold 100 men. The land was purchased later by John Winnie, who lived in the fort while his home was being built a short distance away. The Great Fort is said to have stood on the Great Bluff across from the Hoodler Cemetery. And we all know that's behind the fruit stand now, which is the fruit stand is down Maggie O'Reilly's farm mart. Okay, so this is from the Great Fort Chandakin Flyer. Now over this side, Ruth Gale, who was intimately involved, I guess, with the Winnie family, wrote that her grandfather spoke of part of the foundation of the fort still visible in his day. Now, here's the kicker. I've told you all that, and the sign looks so simple, everything is so simple, but then she wrote, most residents with native roots tell stories about the old fort and how their ancestors were associated with it. Let's read that again. Native roots tell stories about the old fort and now how their ancestors were associated with it. So wait a minute. I thought that, hey, they told us it was built in 1779. That's obviously not true. It was obviously there was a fort there already. And here is more quotes that back that up. According to Sylvester's History of Ulster County, with a foreword by none other than Alf Evers, who I had the pleasure of working with years ago, John Winnie moved into an Indian fort, and the location as described sounds to be nearby. So did Sylvester mean a fort to guard against Indian raids? Probably not. That would be Clinton's fort, but there is a possibility that Chief Chandakin had built an Indian fort in that same general location. And it must have still been there. Otherwise, how could John Winnie move into it? And was the soldier fort great in comparison to the one in Woodstock or to the Indian fort right next to it? We don't know. I mean, you could argue that. Sylvester describes the fort was surrounded by apple trees on all sides, on all sides, and he suggests that the Indians had planted these apple trees. Well, there's a whole nother side to what kind of apples natives had or what kind were there. And I did ask the Winnie Farm people about the apples, and they hadn't done that research yet, but I think they should. Okay, they're good people. Ed West, who's a local journalist, wrote in an interview with Alf Evers in reference to the Fantine Kill attack of 1779, which was a major historical event. While a small outpost had been maintained at Chandakin for some time, the massacre prompted Governor Clinton to beef up the area's defenses by building new forts at Chandakin and Lackawanna. So wait a minute, I thought they built it in 1779. No, they didn't. There was an outpost already, and it's indefinite as to how long it's been there. Well, maybe it was an Indian fort. Clinton did not build the first fort at Chandakin. That's not true. Well, I won't call it fake news, but it's another way of saying something that cuts out part of the truth. There was an old fort there already, clearly. It was standard military protocol for colonists, and this is anywhere in the world, to build their own fort over top of or next to any indigenous fort of a defeated nation, or to at least occupy that fort, so that the enemy can't seize it back. This was certainly the case with the old fort here. And you see why, because, Ticonderoga went from hand to hand, back to back. And, if somebody really wanted to be tough about it, they could have knocked down the fort upon leaving it. So that wouldn't have happened, but it's destructive. So people don't always do that. But the fact is, this is very common, and that apparently might have happened here. And sometimes it's not to destroy the fort. Sometimes, like, for example, at Peebles Island, there was that fort that the chief, Mohican chief, had, defended, and then he died, and then the Mohicans moved, and then George Washington's troops took over that spot, according to my research, and built a new fort there, or used the old fort, in fact, and just beefed it up. Now, Jim Foltz is a New York State historian to this day, and he says the earliest Pacton Trail map was dated 1777 and was probably when the original Indian fort was taken over. That map shows the Pacton Trail to follow the corridor of our Route 28 through all of Chandakin. Okay. Now, a lot of words, but this is really important for education, because Chandakin, if you care about Chandakin, you should know that it's a land of sacred waters and sacred springs. And I discovered this by preparing for this talk. To all the Algonquins, Kichiatuk Wogan, we'll talk about what that means later, the source or headwaters of a river or stream is a sacred place. And you know what it said, water is life. And now people say it Lakota, Mini Watoni, and there's a song about it, actually 2 songs. To respect the source is to respect all life, and warriors would make a pilgrimage along their village stream or another significant waterway to the source or Sweetwater Spring, as it's called translated into English, as a vision quest, perhaps parallel to the quest for higher truth, and for Kishilumokung, he who dreams us into being, in the Munsee language, who lives at the source of light at the 12th level of clouds in the sky. The source waters are known for their incredible purity. So this is back in like physical world stuff. Source waters, symbolic of purity, but they actually tend to be very, very pure and are often quite healing to drink from. Some are even mineral springs, like Laughing Springs in Manhattan turned out to have lithium in it and made people very happy. So there's mineral springs. There's many mineral springs around the US. Chandakin is home to 7 very, very significant sweetwaters and therefore a sacred landscape. So these are some of the 7. They're not insignificant. Rondout Creek, which the natives called Cahaxink, which is a place of wild geese. At the town of Picamoose, Rondout Creek has been following a trail, and then it heads off trail and skirts up the east side of Peakamus Mountain, and heads towards its source at Friday Mountain, which is 3,694 feet, which is above the 3,500 line if you're into the club, and within the borders of Chandakin. Now that Rondout Creek is 63 miles long. Now it's interesting it's called a creek because Harlem River and various rivers all over Detroit River, they're nowhere near that long. And yet Rondout Creek has been, humbled to be called a creek to this day. And that's partly because the Dutch called it a kill, which they kind of made up when they came to the New World. They started using this word for a stream. And it keeps getting, I don't think they realized how long it was. So Esopus Creek, Sipu Shish, or Sipu Us, like Esopus, a little river. In the south of Chandakin lies Winnie Sook Mountain. And Winnie means lovely, and Sook is a precipitation. So it means a lovely form of precipitation, and it's the word used for snow. It is at a fairly high elevation, well, 2,664 feet, has a good view. It would be one of the first villages in the region to see snow in the autumn, because they didn't always live, they almost never lived on top of high mountains. They mostly lived on flatter, lower places. So Winnie Sook as a village site would have been the first place, or the place of first snows. It is part of Slide Mountain, which itself is the tallest in the Catskills at 4,190 feet. But the Esopus is 65 miles long, even longer than the Rondout. And again, it's called a creek. So yeah, it's being humbled for whatever reason, but it's a very significant and beautiful creek. So the source waters are sacred. Neversink Creek, a few hundred feet away from the source of the Esopus on Slide Mountain, is a spring that is the headwaters of the Neversink. And in fact, if you go up there, that little tiny stream or rivulet comes down really near the pond. It's actually a fish pound where Esopus comes from. So it joins the Delaware near Port Jervis, and that's a long way, which is near Minisink Island, the capital of the Muncie, Delaware. And the Neversink is 55 miles long. That's a big river connecting two very sacred spots. Now, next, these others may be not quite as impressive. Woodland Valley Creek was formerly called Muddy Brook. It joins with Muddy Brook. It was called Snyder's Hollow. Now Woodland Valley. It's a small creek that runs near the library. Its source is Slide Mountain, the tallest in the Catskills, as I said. So that comes right into near where the library itself is in Phoenicia, one of those hubs. Panther Kill Creek is one of those small creeks. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the source is Panther Mountain, and it runs into another creek. Bushnellsville Kill, the shallow creek runs down from Rose Mountain along Route 42, which was a trail or portage route along that creek. It starts at the ridge that divides the Schoharie Valley from the Esopus Valley. And maybe it goes past Rose Mountain, and there's branches that come off Rose Mountain that are sources. But to make it simple, we'll say it's sources Rose Mountain, which is in Chandakin. And Bush Creek starts at Halcott Mountain, which is already considered generally sacred. It's a whole nother lecture. Maybe they'll invite me back. I can talk about Halcott and what's there. Okay, the seven sacred waters. So Friday Mountain, the source of the Rondout, is seen in the lower right corner of the map. Friday Mountain is here. And I guess one of these, maybe this one is Rondout because it comes from to the south. Slide Mountain, also lower right, is the source of the Neversink, which I believe means fishing place, but I've heard, high place, Mad River. I don't know if Mad River makes sense. Part of that is Winnie Sook Mountain, also a source of the Esopus. Panther Mountain in the center is the source of Woodland. This whole creek comes from several places, all from Panther Mountain. Woodland Valley Creek. And that joins the Esopus right in Phoenicia, right next to Phoenicia, very close to where the library is. So it's a hub of waterways. Panther Mountain is also the source of the Panther Kill between the Chandakin Center and Alabin is where it joins the Esopus. And again, Halcott Mountain, the source of Birch Creek, and that's, here's Rose Mountain here, here's that Bushnellsville, and Here's High Mount and Hawkins over here. So this is my photo of Winnie Sook Pond, which is the source of the Esopus. So it's a fish pound. I believe that the Native Americans created this fish pound so they could fish at their convenience. And it comes out this sluice here under this bridge. It's a very beautiful spot. And again, in the winter time, you come here and there's plenty of snow, and you can see the snow on the tops of the mountains across the valley, across where the railroad tracks are. And it's the first place you see snow. So the Munsee language is one of dozens of Algonquian, I use Algonquian plural, at least 36 distinct languages spread among 84 nations, all of which are pretty famous, and then hundreds more. All are part of the Algonquin civilization, part of family of languages, the Kichiatuquogan, the people who wear the skins of the white-tailed deer. The Munsee were part of a mythological Lenape League, or maybe a real one, which is colored blue here. In fact, according to the Midewin elders in Canada, there was a kind of a Lenape Lodge of the Midewin too, long ago. But information is not available because the Midewin is basically one of those secret societies. So end of story. Okay, this is the Dancing Rock Observatory seat at Boyceville. This is on private property, but there's all these petroforms, and petroforms are any kind of rock construction throughout the area, especially in Boyceville and Woodstock. There are cairns, stone rows, serpent mounds, and even this chair. Interestingly, most of them are located between 800 and 1100 feet altitude, and that's a whole nother story. This stone bench is located so as to be an ideal astronomical observatory. I don't want to go a lot of detail, but you know, I sat there, I was looking at, you know, the directionality, and the curve of the mountains on the horizon would have probably followed the path of the sun during the winter solstice. And there's more to it. But this is, you know, more and more people are writing about this. I wrote about it in 2002, or wrote about it well before that, in a previous century. Some of you don't remember, but you know, it was published in Native New Yorkers in 2002, and the editors didn't want me to get really out there, but it was some very you know, pretty amazing stuff. And they said, well, yeah, you know, we'll put in some of this, and they did. So this is one of those spots where there's lots of these phenomena. And I'll to mention Glenn Kreisberg has written a book called Spirits in Stone, which I had a hand in, is goes into some detail about these stones. Okay, so just here's that main route, which we now call 28. It's a corridor, culturally a corridor, because it follows this various, one particular Native American trail was very important trail called the Papacton Trail, that it approximates it. Obviously, if you look at, okay, what's old 28, that's going to be closer to the trail. But I thought this is a nice little map here. And so the green part is Chandakin. And this white part is the very interesting continuation of 28 through some very interesting portages. We're going to talk about that. Well, this is an old map, and I humble myself before you because, frankly, I thought this is the earliest map that I found, but I don't exactly know where it is. The drawing on of this house in the middle, this 1820 map of the Ulster and Delaware Turnpike, which is also called the Papacton Turnpike before that, and 28 after that, represents the home of William Rogers. And he was the first town hall supervisor right there. And it says William B. Rogers. Okay, so that we know. But the problem is, there's a big problem. Our current town hall is near the confluence of the Bushnellville. There should be an S, Bushnellsville, and the Esopus. So because of that, it's hard to recognize the landmarks on this map. So could it be somewhere else, or is it really bad? Well, here's the Esopus Kill, but look how far the old road is. So, you know, I came across this fairly recently. I haven't solved that. Now, here is an interesting story. This is a map of the Chandakin area showing Oh, okay, I'm missing a slide. Showing many significant creeks. Does not show Neversink or Rondout creeks, but they're not tributaries of the Esopus, but they begin in Chandakin. An article. Okay, so there's an earlier story of Winnie Sook, and okay. This is the story. I'm going to put these in different order. So the story was published in Myth and Legends of Our Own Land, published in 1896. In the Esopus Valley lived Winnie Sook, whose height was 7 feet, and who was known among white settlers as Big Indian, or the Big Indian. He loved a white girl. Well, his real name was Winnie Sook, right? So he lived in Winnie Sook too. He loved a white girl of the neighborhood, which was in Marbletown, and Gertrude Molino was her name, and had asked for her hand. And in other words, wanted to marry her. But while she was willing, the objections of her family were too strong to overcome, and she was teased into marriage with a Mr. Joseph Bundy of her own race. Well, she liked the Indian all the better after that because she found out that Bundy proved to be a bad fellow. There's all kinds of stories about him. He just spent most of his time in the bar having fights. And believing that she could be happier among quote unquote barbarians, this is how it was published in 1896, than among a people that approved such marriages. She eloped with Winnie Sook. For a long time, well, she eloped, but was she already married to Joseph Bundy? That's something that historians can figure out. Also, it'd be interesting because nobody, by the way, has ever provided a date for this event. And if they found her birth certificate, that would probably help. And maybe there's a marriage certificate to Joseph Bundy. We don't know, but more area for proper research. She eloped with Winnie Sook. And this word eloped has to have a little footnote, like what, eloped because of her father or because of Bundy. Anyway, for a long time, all traces of the runaway couple was lost. But one day, this man, having gone down to the plain to steal cattle, it was alleged, in fact, not true. We know now he was not involved in that, was discovered by some farmers who knew him and who gave him hot chase, coming up with him at the place now called Big Indian. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the previous slide. Okay, so here's the spot where he was tracked down. It turns out to be where the Big Indian statue was. What a coincidence. Okay, according to this article, as I said, was overtaken at the entrance to the Big Indian Valley, which this actually is, at the place occupied by the railroad's Big Curve, which this also is. Thomas Benedict of the Winnie Sook Club wrote that Winnie Sook held council at the future site of the railroad station, which I think now is the post office, and Liz will back me up on that, I think, with a group of raiders who had stolen cattle while settlers camped at Chandakin. Bundy heard about the council and walked to that spot, or ran, we don't know, along what would now be 28 roughly, and shot Winnie Sook with a gun. So we know this was in an era when people had guns. So that's all we know. That is near where the wooden statue stands at the Big Indian Park, and Route 47 and the post office are at the entrance to Big Indian Valley, and the big bend in the railroad is the one along 28 on the opposite side from the statue. The great tree was taken down to build the railway. So over here, the bend is, you see my arrow, this is the big bend in the railroad, and this is the entrance to the valley, and there's the post office, and there's everything all in one place, really. They're a few feet apart. And so this fellow was put up recently, maybe less than 20 years ago. And so many powwows have been held here. The Big Indian powwows are held by the Big Indian. And he has his medicine shield, and he's standing on corn. Anyway, it's pretty cool. I've spent many hours just gazing up at him because I used to go to those powwows. Winnie Sook was 7 feet tall and lived at one time in Marbletown, which is where he met Gertrude Molino. So the question, of course, is it even fictional? Is the whole thing made up? Well, a lot of historians think it's probably true. This map shows 28 in the path of the Big Bend Road even closer. So here's Chandakin Township, Alaben, and Chichester, and here's Phoenicia. So there's the bend in the railroad. There's the entrance to the valley, and going right to Oliveria. and so forth. It's all there. So is it true? Well, here is the Molino Inn, which I think is a clue, I don't know, run by the Molino family, who are, by the way, still exist and make wine. They have vineyards and wineries. But here is another question. Was Gertrude one of their relatives, or was she all made up? Was she fiction? You think they would know, right? Many historians believe the story is true. And she and Winnie Sook lived together for 7 years, according to the April 1955 article. And of course, when people photocopy these articles, they always cut off all the name of the paper, the date, and everything. So that's just the way it is. Okay, now this is my own little addition here. In terms of Native American history in Chandakin, you need to know that, John Burroughs lived right over the border, and his forest networks, part of it lies in Chandakin Township. So these John Burroughs forests are separate plots of land that combined would be very large, but they tend to be in pockets. Some are in Chandakin. Burroughs was interested in Native American culture. He really was. He's written like 20 books, and a lot of them mention Native Americans. He's been criticized sometimes for maybe not going deep, but he gave them a lot of respect for the time period he lived in, around 1900. Here's a photo I recently identified of him standing with this other fellow, and his name is Henry Cloud. This was taken at Yale University. And so you probably recognize this fellow as John Burroughs, but you might not recognize Henry Cloud. He was a young man and not really proven, but he was an ace student at Yale. He became a leader in the field of Indian education, working for the government and trying to reform the BIA as it was then. And he was trying to make Indian education actually beneficial to Native American students rather than to the government. And his efforts and his wife's efforts, who also became famous, led to many civil rights reforms. And there's a book that just came out 2 years ago called Standing Up to Colonial Power. And this picture appeared in it. Well, all the people involved in this book were Native Americans and a lot of them related to this fellow that you see here, Henry Cloud. And they said, well, who's that other guy? It's like a joke I know about the Pope, but I won't go there. But here they're the same height, but they're standing together, a young man and an old man. And the people on the native side were saying, well, it's a great picture of the wonderful, famous Henry Cloud, but who's that other old geezer? Well, I looked at it, I said, oh my God, that's John, you're kidding, that's John Burroughs. And I said, okay, well, why don't you, confirm that, and we'll put that in the next version of the book, the next edition. So I got in contact with Joan Burroughs, a descendant, I guess a granddaughter, and I said, okay, so here's a picture of Henry Cloud. Can you confirm this is John Burroughs? Of course it is, that's John Burroughs. And they had never seen the picture. So I'm happy to identify both of them at once, and it'll be in the next edition of Standing Up to Colonial Power. And did Burroughs stand up to colonial power? Well, it's complicated. He knew he was friendly with Ford and Firestone. Okay, so here's a really important part of Chandakin history, which I spent, 2 years already, I guess, on just accidentally. Many great American cities were built around portages, which is it's called carrying place from the French portage, a gift from Mother Earth where two watersheds come close together without touching, so close that paddlers can carry their canoes from one river to another and one river system to another, which is even better. Finding one of these can double the scope of a water trading route. Now, this picture, by the way, which I found out, is on the south side of Chicago, an easy 1.5 mile portage between Chicago River and the Des Plaines River, which goes to the Illinois River. And that goes to the Mississippi, a mini continental divide between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi Valley. Okay, so here's, so here's the Lake Michigan, and here's these two rivers, and they actually sometimes overflow each other in September. But then there's this route that grew up for people to carry their boats, and that became Route 66 and goes all the way across the United States. And I just love this painting here. People, you see, it was a big deal. At the Revolutionary War, Chicago Portage was used by the British and the colonists. At the conclusion of the war, the Treaty of Paris gave the colonists possessions of all lands east of the Mississippi between the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. But then, by implication, the Chicago Portage was included in that ordinance of Virginia, which stated all navigable waters leading to both Mississippi and St. Lawrence were the carrying places in between are to be forever free. The British, however, refused to agree to that mandate. They wanted to continue their control of the fur trade to encourage the Indians of the regions to resist the colonists. That's from the Friends of the Chicago Portage. Well, the Chicago Portage is one of the most significant ones. Now, here's probably the most significant of a portage. The Haudenosaunee used a chain of portages to travel from the Mohawk River to Lake Ontario, and these were used later by British and Americans. So Oswego became a prominent town because of that route. The portage here was near Oriskany Battlefield, and that's near Rome, New York, to give you a clue, between the Mohawk River and Woods Creek. The British became aligned with the Mohawks, as you all know, sought to acquire their knowledge of the portages in New York Colony, and later used the knowledge to try to defeat American independence. This fact greatly affected the city of White Plains, because they have some portages. Apparently, the Mohawk had taken over the Coropus area of White Plains because of the portages, and that's how the British were able to seize and hold White Plains. But anyway, this is a very nice map of that whole very important Mohawk River portage. And this is almost as famous, the city of Portage, Wisconsin. And it opened up Madison and Baraboo and other places. So you just see another example. The Riviera au Renard means the Fox River, and you can see how it almost crosses the whole state, except there's one spot where you see the star. That's the portage, and that's called Portage, Wisconsin. So if you have any sense, and you can sail right across Michigan, across Wisconsin. Now, the problem is the name in Algonquin for a portage is underneath this bar, and I can't move it, unfortunately. So this is a map I made, and this ties in with where we are. Here's Phoenicia in big green sign right in the middle of the map. And there's three colors. There's yellow, which is Route 23, which is well known as the Susquehanna Trail. And you see there's rivers a lot of the way. But here's Schoharie Creek going that way. Now the orange route is Route 28 today. And this part of it is with the X's represents a part where it is not a portage, but crosses Hurley Ridge, which you could not, I mean, it's not really a river route at that point. But then you continue to here to Boyceville, and then you have 28 and the Papacton Trail become one. Here's the Papacton Trail, very important. And again, this was a very prominent portage route in 1777, according to the state. It starts really in Kingston at Tannery Brook, or beyond. That's just Washington Avenue, and then it connects to 209, which is the Minisink Trail, and it goes right along the Esopus, and then it turns up Tongor Road, therefore following the Esopus as it turns, and then going along 213, which follows the Esopus, then into here we go into 28, 28A, and then 28. And here where Stony Clove meets the Esopus, that's where Phoenicia is. Here's Chandakin, and Route 28 continues along that same road. But here it separates, and here's Papacton, and this is now the reservoir. And so this is how 30 continues and completes this route, whereas 28 goes on with, these are portage routes, excuse me, the portage areas where you carry your boat and you get all the way to the Susquehanna. Now, Liz, are you there?
Yes, and I was actually just going to give you the 5-minute warning because we're 5 of 8.
Oh,
Realizing you have given us such a gift with so much material and research for this that this could fill up several evenings, and I'm thinking we would like to invite you to deliver part 2 in February if you can't finish. So
okay. Oh boy. Okay, so here's what I think. Maybe Michael can come in during the discussion period, but I'm gonna race through a little bit of the winter, since we did talk about it I mean, we did.
Absolutely. And that's fine. And then whatever time is left, we can take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So, close up of where we are, Chandakin, here's Phoenicia, and these trails are actually, I mean, pretty much established that all of 28 was portage. There was almost all rivers beside it and so forth and so on. But then it splits here. And it's part of, here's 209. All of 209 is pretty much a portage route that goes along waterways. And then the Pacton Trail just branches off here. And here it is. Here you see the Wittenberg Road is like an old 28. So that's the old portage route, goes right into Phoenicia, right, connects with 214. And here's the Manitou marker. And so, I'm just going to cut to the chase here. But this is, many have, for Glenn Kreisberg's GPS work on this, establishes it as part of this alignment with the summer and winter solstice. And so here's a map he gave to me, which shows the alignment between the sacred stone, similar monolith here, and Devil's Tombstone here. Again, we could talk a lot about that. This is a map I made of the whole in between area, and there are sacred areas all along this line. So I'm gonna, okay, even in these backwoods areas, Route 28 could be used as a portage route using lightweight canoes. So now I'm gonna race through, there's your famous statue there in the winter. But these are 7 points about keeping comfortable in the winter without electricity. It's important to have the right liquids and solids, important to move around, important to stay dry. It's important to use fire appropriately and get heat from many fires to share fires. Dressing appropriately is 5, and we'll get into tanning later. 6 is seeking shelter. And then 7 is having a warm heart. So I'm just going to show you the highlights. Liquids and solids. Herbal tea was the beverage of the Algonquins, warms you up. And liquid and solids, corn has a caloric intake level, so it warms you as you eat it. I also want to mention pemmican is good in the winter because it keeps, and it's made from mulberries and deer meat or venison, which the two have a chemical reaction that makes the food never spoil. Okay, now I wanted to share this with you. If you run out of food in the woods, you can harvest the tender cambium layer from a tree and eat it raw by peeling off the first layer of the bark. You can eat raw or make bread out of the cambium of aspen, birch, willow, maple, and pine. So use good judgment, see if you can ingest it. There's a sap or gum or resin that comes out. You can lick that and shred the rest and chew it, or cut the rest in strips. But you would chew hard, of course, or boil it. It can be used to thicken soups. And I put this under Native American beliefs because I've never done it myself, but I've seen it done. Anyway, very rich in C. Now, this is one of my favorite foods here. They're called spruce tips. And you can see this, and people who get recordings can read these more carefully. But these are the spruce tips, are very delicious and addictive and very healthy. And this is ice hole fishing, some etchings, many different styles of ice fishing. And you have to, like, some people use ice shanties, but the Micmac have always used this kind of harpoon that goes back 7,500 years from the red paint people. There's our key number 2 moving around. There's our snowshoes, Agim in Algic language. And Joe Burshak told me he's worn these shoes all his life. He used to be able to run in them on top of the snow, no matter how deep. That Algonquins never used snow shovels, but would just walk on top of the drifts. If it was needed to be moved, then snow would be moved with a large piece of elm bark, which would become hard after being dried. And so there's this, he said, this is the snowshoe, which is as necessary in winter as the canoe is in summer. Through the whole of North America, all the warriors, hunters, traders, travelers, churchgoers, men, women, and children would move about in snowshoes. So here is a picture of a man walking, or a woman walking around in snowshoes with a toque on its head. Now, this is George Catlin's painting of a snowshoe dance. So obviously very comfortable. They wore them all winter. And my great aunt Helen said they got the idea from watching snowshoe rabbits run through the snow. And there's this snow snake game, which is very well known and very popular among natives even today. And they custom make each snow snake individually for that particular lake or pond. And they use them to slide across big creeks and rivers to send messages to the other part of the village on the other side of the lake or creek. So staying dry, obviously, keep your clothes dry. It's good to have fire. This is a bow drill, and this is a nest that's used. This is a very primitive kind of bow drill. You want a piece on the top to hold the stick, and then you use the bow and you spin it by going back and forth, but you have to put your foot on it. And then, there's coals are created in this hole here, and then it falls out the channel into your nest. So there's certain, I just want to say that the kind of this nest is very key, because it's supposed to catch fire right away. Tinder plants include dogbane, milkweed, stinging nettle, fireweed, cattail. Those are the really good ones. Also, I've seen a bamboo pole shredded using a pocket knife to make such a nest. Also, inner tree bark is good, and outer tree bark don't need to be shredded. You just pick them off the ground, birch, cedar, and juniper. Pull them off the tree or take them on the ground and let them dry. And then this pine wood board is a very important part of that, but it takes a little practice. Some people use a green leaf as a kind of a lubricant in between the stick, and the holding piece. Well, there's other methods which we can talk about later, but birch bark is really a great tinder, and I place it in a little house of wood pieces, sort of like a carport with a wide opening in front and boards in pieces across the top, and it really makes a good fire. Dressing appropriately. Okay, seeking shelter. Look at this. This is a really important thing. This is more of an Algonquin style igloo. They didn't make them like you see in the movies. This is an Algonquin style igloo, and I found this photo of one. It's called a snow shelter, and a big pile of snow, and then you tunnel into it from one side, and then the blanket might be used through a door. You just leave it open because your body generates enough heat to warm the inside of the igloo or snow shelter after several minutes. Hunters stuck in the storm will still do this, and my Mi'kmaq grandfather and his father did this several times, especially when blizzards would blow up unexpectedly while hunting, and especially in northern Maine where that happens. Sometimes they'd call them igloos, but they really would say, well, but it's really a snow shelter. It's an Algonquin snow shelter. See it later. Okay, wigwams are very important. This one is at Chokin Center near you. The wigwam on the lower left is a suitable one for winter. You see there's a toboggan and some big snowshoes. Some New England wigwams were double walled with 2 sets of elm panels inside and out. Scientists determined that these structures are as well insulated in winter as any building in the world, and they need almost no additional heat. Having a warm heart. Well, I have these stories, Shingabis, you can see online, but this story, the Muncie Dollar story of Snowboy, is really an authentic Muncie story they would have told in the winter, and this version is based on Jack Beerhorst books, which are really terrific. The White Deer and Other Stories told by the Lenape, which is really told by Jack Beerhorst. And I think Lenape people like his stories. So it goes on. I maybe read this later if we have a chance. And I want to thank also Chandakin Historical Museum, who helped me quite a bit with some of the research. So, and Kathleen Myers. So Chandakin includes Alabin, Big Indian, Bushnellsville, Chichester, High Mount, Mount Pleasant, Mount Tremper, Olivera, and I said that wrong, Phoenicia, Pine Hill, and Woodland Valley. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, stop sharing here. And we're back online. So that was my, I guess we got a little of that winter in there because, we promised it and it's only 8:05. So hope everybody's happy with that.
Thank you so much. would you like to invite Mike to chime in at this point? You wanted to talk about the controlled burns?
Yeah, perhaps around Pipacton, where the Pipacton Trail actually goes. Okay, Mike, you wanna? There you go.
They were unmuted, and do you want me to?
You're fine now.
edit this? So you can. So this
Okay.
is where the camera is.
Oh, the camera is there?
The camera's here. The screen. Yeah.
Wait, am I on?
Yes, you're on. You're unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
This is a surprise to me. I thought I was going to learn and not teach. Wait, now I'm distracted here. Your question was on the controlled burns?
Well, yeah, we did that project, together with Green, lived at Tri-County, and
Yeah.
there's a map that's a Pipacton area. Do you remember
Okay.
that?
Yeah, there's another map coming out for the spring issue of Catskill Tri-County Historical Views, where I speak about the East Branch Delaware Valley
Great.
in more detail. Well, what is it you'd like me to say?
Well, I was going to, like say, I know you don't have the map ready, but, how they controlled the burning so that it didn't get out of control, and how that helped in, I guess, agriculturally, right?
Well, you taught me that. I have notes from you from a few years ago on how they did the controlled burning. You drew a diagram for me. I still have it.
Okay, but you did the research on the mountain laurel.
Yes, I've been studying the mountain laurel, trying to determine how old it is, how old the populations are.
But they tend to come up in places where it was burned, right?
Yes, yes. And the oldest populations, I estimate, in the East Branch Delaware Valley, where the Pipacton Reservoir is now. My first estimate for the oldest, largest mountain laurel population was about 900 and something years. And that's what I've read. You can correct me on this, is when the Native Americans started the agriculture in New York State.
That's right. Wow.
And I'm wondering the mountain laurel is coincidental with that. I nearly fell off the roof when I read that.
Hmm.
But I've been mapping the distribution of what I think are burned over lands. But as far as what was controlled and what was out of control, I haven't been able to do that.
Okay. Okay.
I learned the
So
control techniques from you. I have a diagram somewhere that you sketched for me.
yeah, we use the bird. They look for the birds, telling them the storm's coming, and then they cut the fire lanes against
Yes.
but against a river, which in this case would have been that branch of the Delaware, right?
Yeah, the Pipacton.
The Pipacton, right? So I wanted to, hear from you about this, and I appreciate you being here and sharing a few words. And people can read the articles in the Tri-County, is it Gazette? I remember what they call it, but
Catskill Tri-County Historical Views.
historical views.
Another
Okay.
one coming out in the spring.
Well, and good. Now everybody will know to look for that. And you and I did a set of 2 articles was it in fall a year ago? Oh, look at it.
Is this the issue?
No.
Oh, it's just another
It's
issue.
another issue. Anyway, it's it's a meaty kind of publication,
Hmm.
right?
One
So
of the
anyway,
things
go ahead.
I've written about in the article that's coming out in, I suspect it's May, is that there are 2 valleys that are tributary to the East Branch Delaware in the Pipacton Reservoir area that apparently were burnt over and yet have no floodplain for any reasonable agriculture. And that to me is a puzzle. That looks like something out of control.
Hmm.
But it's strange because there's no real agriculture in that valley now or before. It's a very narrow valley without a floodplain.
Hmm.
I don't know why anyone would have planted anything down in there, and yet the forest around it says, I've been burned. So I wonder if that's out of control, whereas the main floodplain of the Pipacton was burned in full control for agriculture.
Could those smaller valleys have been burned for hunting grounds?
Yes, for other reasons, surely.
Right. What about nuts? What about
Yeah.
to encourage
Yeah.
ground nuts?
Absolutely, because there are 2 species of hickory in there, and you have the oaks and the American chestnut.
And they would harvest them for food.
Yes,
Well, that's
It
a,
could have been burned for nut trees
yeah,
and not for agriculture.
that would make sense enough. That's
Yes.
enough explanation. And then the deer come to eat the nuts.
Yes,
And they love the deer.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's the, enough justification right there.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, it's been great. I think there's some other questions coming in for, for me, but you can, hang out. It's great having you here. And I know that, I think maybe Liz wants to
Yep, we've got
cover.
our first question is from Grace Walking Waters. And Grace asks, how do people stay warm? How did women diaper their babies? And very practically, how did they keep their wood dry?
Well, those are good questions. Well, they use moss for diapers early days. So they had something that, they have the papoose with that by many names. It wasn't just one word. There are many names for the papoose, but the papoose could be filled with, certain cloth fibers and keeping the baby warm in the papoose. And so I think the papoose was a regular thing. I think that babies stayed in the papoose quite a lot when they were very young. And so hopefully keeps the baby warm. And in terms of the other question was how keeping the wood dry. I know that's still a problem today, isn't it? Yeah, well, there's, people tell me that the best way to keep wood dry is not just to throw a tarp over it, but to have something like a little roof of some kind, and you can make those with just like a board or something, but that the wood keeps driest when there's a little space there. It's got to breathe, and definitely no water should get on it. But that's, I think, an eternal problem, because I think the wood did get wet, and I think it's very serious sometimes. So that's what they call a stumper, or in Maine, a stumpa. So if somebody else has an answer for that about how to keep the wood dry, I'll go and do it to keep my wood dry out here, because I have that problem.
Great, thank you. So Anna says, this was wonderful. Would love to know more about what was foraged and cooked, specifically mushrooms and maple syrup. Was that something that you have a sense was eaten and cultivated? Or
Yeah, certainly. There's the problem with mushrooms is, of course, you can eat the wrong ones and die very quickly. So this is something the elders would oversee. And the women, I think, were mainly the mushroom gatherers. And there's so many different species, and they come up quickly. And my Aunt Helen knew her, inky blacks. And she was said they would like come up quickly, they'd be around for a while, and then they would disappear almost instantaneously for no apparent reason. And I think it's mostly when it's wet, they grow up, and when it's dry, they disappear. So you got to catch them when you can. There's a lot of different uses of mushrooms. And so I think there's one that's a good tinder for making fires. But in terms of what was one of the other parts of the question again? There was another part of the question.
Also, maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Okay, I have a video that I made on Native American practices of maple syrup with the Ashokan Center, and it's on their website, and it's really good. I mean, a lot of people were involved, so it was me and several other people, and I covered the Native American view of maple sugaring in the old days. And so I went back further, and talked about how to do maple sugaring again before electricity. So you can take a sumac branch, and there's a good length of it, and you cut these tubes from the hollow sumac branch, and then you stick it in the hole in the maple tree at the time of the spring when the sap is rising and falling. And then you have a water basket, which is I had one and I actually gave it to the Ashokan Center. It's a birch bark basket that actually holds water because of the way it's folded. And so you put that underneath there and collect the sap. And then you put that into a log that's been hollowed out, you know, a long log with a long narrow channel that, you know, you burn, you have like stones that get hot in the fire, and then you place the stone into the water basket. And we have this on film. So we dropped this was a very big moment in my cinematic career. It's like we had this, you know, water basket filled with sap, and we used actually water to demonstrate. And then we dropped this hot rock into the water basket, and it immediately boiled, which is very dramatic. And so you can imagine the sap would be the same way. You get your very thin sap, and you know, it's like water. You put it in the water basket, you drop the hot stone in, and eventually will boil off. It takes a really long time. But they had teams of people working together to not only harvest the maple syrup, maple sap, but also make maple syrup. And that video is on their archive from, I think, last winter. And I think it's, you know, a whole long little video, Catskills conversations. So I think you can see it for free. So that's everything I have to say about maple sugaring the native way is in that film, except the stuff might get edited out.
So Joan Apter is going back to the idea of herb teas. You mentioned their importance, and she said, what were the herbs in the tea?
You got cut out. What did you say?
She asked what were the herbs in the winter tea? What was brewed in the winter tea?
Well, you know, I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure there was a different tea in the winter, but it's pretty much because of its properties. So I always think of peppermint being used to make teas in the winter. It's good for, you know, your digestion, but hibiscus is good for winter stuff. You know, colt's foot is good for your respiratory. So of course they just tend to use them more in the winter, but there wasn't like a rule that this is winter and this is summer, because they gathered and dried those herbs all year, and they would protect them and, you know, save them up, and then use them all winter for the teas. Now, there's also teas that are made from fresh leaves, and I'm not quite as familiar with that. I know you put mint in, just regular mint, fresh sometimes. Not as familiar with that, but in the summer you do that. In the winter, you don't use any fresh leaves, as far as I know. You use the dried, and so there's certain, you know, there's a certain calendar for berries, for example. Also, blackberry tea was done by boiling the berries themselves, and you could do that with mulberries too. You could, some berries you can boil them, and then you can, you know, make a tea out of that, and it's not really a tea technically, but that's a good winter thing. I want to mention that as part of our winter theme, winter doesn't start until the last blackberry is picked, and that's like across Northeast woodlands. So you wait until that, you know, you keep picking them as you can because they're good food, and the blackberries, then you pick the last blackberry, and that's when winter officially starts, symbolically speaking. It's not really a tea.
I have a question. You mentioned a couple of times your great Aunt Helen around the snowshoes and other things. Was she somebody that was important to you in terms of teaching about your history and family? Can you tell us about her?
Yeah, she was, first of all, I'll say that she's quite famous in her day. She was, you know, I'd be over her house and she'd turn on the TV, and she was on the TV, said, oh, this is all click, you know, just to kind of make a point of how famous she was. And so she was a leading voice in Maine in the 60s for Native rights, Native environmentalism. And she was Mi'kmaq, and she taught me a lot. And bird medicine is based a lot on her teaching. Also, I mean, that's in the stores, but there's another book called Aunt Helen's Little Herb Book, and that's a pretty amazing book. because she really, spelled it all out. A very complex subject. And I sell that myself. And it's up through my website, which is algonquinculture.org, not surprisingly. And so you just write in and then give the information. They're still only $10 and illustrated by Janet Jappin, by the way, who's a herbalist herself. But she taught me about birds. She taught me about the herbs. And so that's 2 books. But she also was an expert on animals, and amazing. And Walt Disney would like bow at her feet and say, "Please help! I have a Quadamacundi that doesn't feel right." And she's like, "Oh, okay, I'll fix it for you, and I'll take care of him." And she would. And she also worked with presidents. But I guess she didn't care about these elite people. She just cared about the animals, and she would heal their animals. And so she was very famous for animals. Several books were already written by other people even before I could write about her and her animals. So I didn't do that. Okay, but there's 3 books about on Helen. So yeah, that's why I've mentioned her. And she was an honorary Passamaquoddy because her father was a honorary chief on Passamaquoddy, because he kind of got the tribe through a very difficult winter by building them about 9 frame houses, so they get through the winter a little easier. Whereas he was found by them in one of those snow shelters, and they said, "Oh, you're pretty good at this. We like how you do these snow shelters, so show us." And Aunt Helen actually taught bird lore to the Passamaquoddies very early on, because they had apparently felt they weren't sure they knew much about birds as she did. So yeah, she really initiated me into the Micmac lore. At the age of 13, I didn't know it was going to hit me.
Great. I look forward to reading more about her. Mary Jo asks, she says, "I live where the Esopus and the Little Beaverkill meet in Mount Tremper." We all probably know where that is, us locals. And she wonders about the families that gathered and lived here and what kind of community sharing there was before Europeans arrived, and maybe even after they arrived.
Well, it's theoretical, because the actual historical data on Native Americans in Chandakin isn't, as far as I can see, very deep, very detailed. But we can look at it and be sure that they would follow Algonquin cultural norms. And so there was quite a bit of sharing. And it was, I've kind of spent a lot of time in the bush up in Canada with Algonquins, and I have I think a feel of how it might have been, because, there's people that I've, I guess, been around with very traditional. And this idea that, everybody just shared everything all the time without keeping track, that's just not possible, and sorry, but it's, it's a little more interesting than that, because everybody was a trader, and with a D, trader, and would like, what's the word, haggle, but very kindly, I think, but firmly, when it came to something of real value. But they would share all the food at gatherings, and the gatherings were meant to be sort of like a potlatch, sort of a time when everything was, everybody's. There are certain customs, however, that are, I think, interesting and amusing. Like if you, among the Cree, if you compliment somebody's clothing or an object that they have, you say, "That's really nice. I really like that." They're assuming that you want to share it or just walk away with it. And there's an obligation in certain clans where you just do that. So I was at a gathering, and I just came up to this Cree guy to this beautiful jacket. And I just, "Oh, that's the most beautiful jacket. I really think it's great you're wearing that jacket." And he's like, bye. And he left the gathering. It wasn't my intention. And anyway, that's not the norm, but the sharing is part of the culture. But I just want to say, people get carried away, with economic theories. And so somebody asked me at this big gathering, there was hundreds of people, and I was on stage, and somebody said, "So what's the Algonquin economic theory?" Because we're talking about all these different economic theories. And at first I said, "Well, of course there's none." And then I said, "Wait a minute, economic theory of the Algonquins is building circles of trust through diplomatic means over a period of time, so that when you're trading, you know that you're getting some quality items and not just some crap, because it's very hard in the bush when somebody says, here, take my whatever, my fur, my food, whatever it is, and we'll trade for it. That at first glance, it's hard to tell how valuable something is. And so then you haggle. It says, oh, well, I've seen better, blah, 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 and then, well, you try to make sure you're getting equality, like you're even good exchange. The exchange is a very basic concept, and good exchange is something to strive for, but they do it without trying to control the other person. And when this new book that everybody's talking about is The Dawn of Everything, and there's a Huron character who grew up around Algonquins in the 1600s and 1700s, and has this point. He says, it's not the money that we're complaining about, it's how you use it to control each other. I don't want anything to do with that money, because you control each other. And that's like, his name was Candid Toron, I think that's, I got one. Yeah. He was, one of the founders of the Enlightenment movement accidentally. But I think that was interesting what he said, is that, you share, you don't try to control people, you try to have this equality in your trading. That's why you don't just say, would take everything, because ultimately somebody would take advantage of that.
Thank you. We have one more time, just one more question, and then the formal part will end and we'll turn the recording off. Pam asks, back to the controlled burns, what is the connection between mountain laurel and controlled burns? Pam says, near the trailhead to the wild forest in Willow, New York, which is east of Phoenicia, there are a number of stone structures, maybe similar, akin to the observatory structures you showed, structures. And I guess near them or around them are mountain laurels.
Oh, wow. So no, I don't know why they would be, why they'd be there, but maybe Mike, you have a, comment of why. Well, the mountain laurels, as Mike was saying, that they grow where there has been burning.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a clue there. But in terms of the petroforms linked to mountain laurel, I don't know about that. I'm not familiar. Mike, do you want to avoid that question, or? I can't. Okay. I'm sorry, Mike. I can't hear you, Mike. Can you, Liz, could you help him out?
Unmute.
There you are. Go ahead. No, I can't hear him now.
So you can, you're good. Don't
Okay.
push more buttons. You're good. We can hear you.
Well, this is Mike Kudich. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Oh, you can. Okay, because we had it muted.
right.
The relationship of stone artifacts and mountain laurel. The stone artifacts would tend to be in areas where there is mountain laurel, but you can have mountain laurel without stone artifacts and the other way around. Mountain laurel is a moderately shade tolerant shrub. If the original northern hardwood forest of sugar maple, beech, hemlock is left intact, mountain laurel cannot grow under it. It's too shady. Mountain laurel needs a forest which is not as heavily shaded. That would be oaks, hickories, chestnut. So there are places now near the Pepacan Reservoir where mountain laurel is on its way out because the oaks and hickories and chestnut are being replaced by hemlock or sugar maple and beech. I think it's a matter of mountain laurel being moderately shade tolerant. They cannot tolerate too much shade, but they can tolerate a little bit of shade. And that would really determine the distribution. If you have oak, hickory, and chestnut forests, you can have mountain laurel and some other shrubs underneath it. Mountain laurel is not the only one. But if it comes into a beech, sugar maple, hemlock forest, it's just too shady. You'll have a different array of shrubs and undergrowth.
And the reason the hardwoods are replacing the nut forest is because the burning has stopped.
Because the burning has stopped.
Right,
So the northern hardwoods and hemlock are coming back.
right.
Yes.
Oh, Well, that's a lot to wrap your brain around. You know, I've just been
You bet.
learning, has been learning about the maximum, you familiar with this? There's the oak maximum about 2000 BC, 3000 BC, where there's an all-time high of populations of the nut trees.
Okay, yes, that would be 2000 BC. That would be 4,000, 5,000 years ago, BP, before present. Okay,
Right.
yeah.
So
That's
there were,
when I
go ahead.
That's when I start seeing charcoal in the bogs
Oh.
along the escarpment about 7,000, 6,000 years ago, when the fires started sweeping up the escarpment from the Hudson Valley.
Hmm.
Because previous to that, if you got a charcoal up on top of Balsam Lake Mountain 9,000 years ago, that was a forest fire set by lightning.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, it all fits. And when we talk about, in the oral tradition, we talk about, you know, the acorn times. We talk about the acorn as being like Segaban, the old ones, you know, that ate the acorns. Because of course you have to be pretty hungry to eat acorns and go through all that work. But you know, so it does check out that that was about the time when we say, oh, you know, the Algonquin culture was great at 4,000 BC, you know, 3,000 BC. And that was when the elders were wise and all this stuff. So that's part of our, I wouldn't even call it mythology. It turns out to be true, is that we had lots of acorns, and that was a kind of peak of that early phase of our culture.
This is Mike Kudish again. I'm not going to take the time now, but I've been doing some thinking about the lack of spruce right in the immediate Phoenicia area, not in the town of Chandakin, but in the immediate Phoenician area. I have ideas on that. I can send you an email message once I get my computer working on my ideas on that, and general distribution of spruce in the Catskills.
Oh, I'm really interested. What about the blight on the hemlocks? They're having a problem.
The adelgid.
Yeah, the
probably?
woolly adelgid. Yeah, that's not a joke. I get worried about that. I'm hoping it's something that we'll lose some of the hemlocks, but not all of them, because that's a major component of the forest of the Catskills. So I'm worried about that, but that's all recent.
Right. How recent? Like 2 years or 5 years?
When did people start worrying about the hemlock woolly adelgid? 2008. No, it's in the last several decades.
Okay.
But in this
Good.
area more recently.
More recently here, yeah.
Right. And of course, the hemlock were, I guess, would you say, here's a question I want to ask you, Mike, because you're the authority. But
I'm a student.
a student of life. That's good. So before all the tanneries came in, were there more hemlocks or less? The industry, did it kill a lot of hemlocks, or did it encourage the growth of hemlocks so that they could be used for tanning?
It did both. There are places where hemlock has come back. There are places where there's no hemlock today and there used to be.
Okay.
It depends almost on an individual mountain slope basis. What I've been doing now is, from other people and myself, is mapping bark roads and trying to figure out where the individual tanneries got their bark.
Oh, that's
Certain tanneries I've been able to map quite thoroughly, and other tanneries I really have little idea where they got their bark.
okay. Well, that's interesting.
And
So, of
Delaware
course-
tannery is quite different than Ulster and Green in bark roads. I've just learned that the last few months.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a whole new thing just now on my radar for the first time. So thank you. So I know Liz wants to say, you know, it's time, but of course we have no word for time in Algonquin. We have no idea what you're talking about.
So I also want to say thank you to Mike for, you're quite the ringer in the audience. Thank you for chiming in several times about this history, the trees as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but I'm a bit surprised. I was here to learn. I took tons of notes. I have to digest what all the wonderful stuff that Evan has been giving to us.
Oh, well, it's like digesting cambia, right?
So I'm
Cambium.
going to say
Oh.
thank you, and I'm just going to end the recording, and everyone is, you know, welcome to leave if they need to, or if anyone, Mr. Pritchard, I don't know if you have a few minutes to stay after and just chat.
Well, I want it before you stop recording. want to say that, I have a lot of books, not just 4 books, there's like 70 about these subjects, and they're all now listed on the website, which is algonquinculture.org. And so Mike is holding up these books. Now Mike has 2 heads, you see that? But thank you, Mike. Those are 2, I'm proud of them. They're out there in the stores, and still are. They've been in the stores for years, but I have like 17 books in the stores all told, but I've got about 70 books that you only get through me. Well, by the 50 other books. So it's algonquinculture.org, and it's finally up to date, and you can, write to me, and you can order the books all about this type of stuff.
So that I put that website in the chat. If
Yes,
people
thank you.
follow that. And you can also call the library if you lost it or have a question about that.
And now you're going to be able to, people are going to be able to go to the Phoenicia library and get some of these books, right?
Yep, we ordered all 4 of the books related to the Algonquins, and then it'll take us about a month to catalog them, and then they'll be
Okay.
I'm guessing some of them are already in the library system.
Yes, there.
Libraries. So before, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been, it feels like a whole door is opening, and there's just so much. And I really hope that you would be willing to come back, and there's so much material you have to share. Thank you. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll come back.
Great.
It's nice.